Hey, thanks for checking out my video. We're here in gloomy Philadelphia, not always sunny. The goal of this video is to teach you some Blender basics and hopefully introduce you to this workflow. I'm a photographer. I've been a photographer for the last 10 years. I got into Blender stuff during the pandemic. It's really changed a lot for me. I love it so much. It took me hundreds of hours of YouTube videos to kind of compile the knowledge. I wanted to give you everything that I found to be relevant to photography and video and give it to you, the beginner. If you don't have a background in photography or video, also I still hope that this is relevant to you and I hope you can gain something from this, so let's get to it. So there's a link to our tester object in the description if you want to go ahead and download that. And we can go ahead and get started. So when you open up Blender, it's basically going to look like this. It starts you off with this cube and this weird shape over here, this thing over here. And you'll notice if you try to click on stuff, it doesn't move. So starting off, I'm going to get you into the basics of how this program works. And now we're by no means going to cover everything that's in this program or everything that this program could possibly do. This is supposed to be very basic, boiled down beginner steps for someone who has never opened up this program before. For this video, we're working with Blender 3.0 that came out pretty recently. So you can go ahead and download that from blender.org or something. Just Google Blender and it's what comes up. Also, I'm working with a Mac. I'm working in OS 10, whatever the latest Mac OS is. And then one thing that's kind of important to note at a certain point here. So I'm using this Mac Magic Mouse, which actually works really well. And a laptop trackpad actually works fairly well. I know people suggest like a mouse with a scrolly wheel in the middle. I guess is good for a 3D workflow as well. I would just say that a traditional, maybe old school mouse that just has the two buttons, the left click and the right click, is not ideal for this. I think for this tutorial, you can get through it that way, but for the overall workflow, if you like this and if this is something that you want to get into, just not the two-click button mouse. It's just kind of the hardest way to work with this stuff. So when you first open up Blender, this big area here, this big main area is called the Viewport. So this is where all of our objects, our lighting, this is where everything lives and kind of where we preview everything. So Blender starts you off with this gray square in our Viewport environment. And this up here is actually a light, and this right here is actually a camera. So I personally do not use any of this where it is, maybe the cube sometimes. Over on the right here, up above me, is our properties. So you can click on these different tabs and there are different things in here which we'll get into. Then up here we have our objects that are within our scene. So you can see here in our viewport we just have the camera, the cube, and the light. And then in this area over here, similar to like layers in Photoshop, you see the camera, the cube, and the light. So the difference between this and Photoshop is it's three-dimensional. So in Photoshop, the camera would be on top of the cube and that would be on top of the light. In Blender, these are just in alphabetical order. It has nothing to do with the order that you see them in. And nothing's necessarily on top of one another. Everything is just existing in 3D space. So it could be in front of it, but it's all depending on 3D space. So to get into some controls here, this green line that you see, this is the y-axis. This red line is the x-axis, and then straight up and down is the z-axis, which it does not give you a line for. So to get into the most basic of the basics, first let's click on this light. So you click on the light, you see that the light gets selected over here. So there are a lot of keyboard shortcuts in Blender. Keyboard shortcuts are a big part of this. I'm also going to put a keyboard shortcut cheat sheet in the description, so you can go ahead and take a look at that. It might be helpful throughout this, maybe. I also have my keys showing up on the screen as I'm pressing them. That hopefully is a helpful thing. But so to delete something from your scene, press X. So first, click on our light, press X, and then it asks if you want to delete. click on delete. And so I would also go ahead and this camera, you can left click on this camera, press X, it asks if you want to delete it. If it asks that right under your mouse, so if you move your mouse away, then it'll like unask you that and it'll stay there. So you have to press X, it asks if you want to delete, and then before you move your mouse off of it, left click on that and say delete. And then you can see it also is gone from your collection area over here. So that was X for delete. Okay, so before we get into moving around our cube, on this magic mouse, if you just kind of like move around in the middle, just kind of scroll about in the middle, that controls this whole viewport three-dimensionally, which is honestly pretty nice. And I think it's the same thing that like a wheel in the middle would do, or like a whatever thing would be there on a 3D mouse. I don't know, never used one. So that moves us around in three-dimensional space. Now, sometimes this scene is so basic that you can actually end up upside down, and I know that that's something that happens with beginners. So in this upper right-hand corner here, you have kind of like a compass of these axes. So if you were to end up upside down, the Z shows up on top. So this is what it looks like when it's upside down. This is what it looks like when it's right side up. And you can click these as well. You can click on Y and it'll show you from the Y axis perspective. It'll click on X, it'll show you from the X axis perspective. So also, if you just have a mouse with the 2 buttons, you can click on this. I'm going to call it a compass. I know that's not what it is, but you can click and drag this, and that will move you around in three-dimensional space. It's not my favorite way to work, but you can click and drag this compass if you just have a mouse with a left click and a right click. Also, if you're just using a trackpad on a laptop, if you use your 2 fingers can move you around in the three-dimensional viewport as well, which isn't bad. I really don't mind that as like a trackpad workflow. I think the mouse is super nice. I think the mouse is the best that I've used so far, but for the laptop people, like a MacBook, you can just use your 2 fingers on the trackpad and kind of move around in three-dimensional space that way. I think it's fairly intuitive. So also over here you have your zoom, your little hand, and then some other things we'll get into later. If you want to zoom into your scene, you can click on the magnifying glass and scroll forward or back, and it'll do this. Then, if you say you, for whatever reason, want to move over here, it'll make sense later, and I'll go over all this again later, but these are just the basic mechanics. If you click on this hand, same thing, click on it, hold it, and then move your mouse or move around on the trackpad. That kind of moves you left to right, up and down. And then, yeah, just be careful not to get lost. I know that's a thing that can happen in the beginning, but click on the hand, drag it around. That'll move you around in a left, right, up and down kind of way. You can click on the magnifying glass. It'll zoom you in and out. And then to move around in 3D space, you can just move around on the Magic Mouse or 2 fingers on the trackpad. All of this will be in the cheat sheet. So now that we've covered the general object basics, we're just going to go ahead and dive in so this doesn't take forever. So I would actually click on this cube, press X, and delete that. Left click on delete. So now we're going to import our object that you downloaded from the link in the description. So we're going to go to File and Import FBX. So I have that file zipped, so you can go ahead and unzip it. If you're on a Mac, I think you can just double click it and it'll unzip it. If you're using something else, unzip it. If you don't know how to unzip it, Google unzipping it, but I'm pretty sure if you just like double click on it in most operating systems, it'll open it up. This also works on Linux. For all you Linux heads out there, I know you're watching. So we're going to click on File, and we're going to go down to Import. So the file type that we're importing is FBX, and that's how this import works. You have to select the file type before you import. I'm not super sure why, but that's how it works. So you're importing a .fbx, so we're clicking on that, and then navigate to wherever that downloaded and unzipped file is. Another note is this. So for me, it's in my downloads. It's not in my downloads. All right, so that folder will contain a couple other images, and leave those images in that folder. Those are important. Those need to be there. Again, we'll get more into that later, but don't just take the FBX file and put it somewhere else. Like, that FBX file should be with those other images for now. So click on our Populare FBX. I believe that's French. I am not sure, but according to Google, it is. So we're going to click on that, and then we're going to click Import FBX. Bam. And then you'll see our unshaded version of that object, and now you're using Blender. You're already like super far deep in. See how easy this is? You just import it. It's in there. This isn't that hard. I told you. So now we have our object. I'm going to click on our little moving hand thing to get it somewhat in the center, and you can scroll around on your mouse or use your two fingers to scroll around on the trackpad, and you're in three-dimensional space. So over here, we have our different shading options for the viewport. So this one that looks like a little wire globe, that is called our wireframe mode. So this actually shows us all of the edges that are, you know, it's a mesh, it's a wire mesh. It's a wire mesh version of this object that you just imported. So our default is the solid mode, is that right? So this is our solid mode preview that you've already seen. So this is our object in the solid mode, as you've already seen. Then the next one is our material preview. Now, this is where it's going to get a little bit interesting. This is where it's going to get, you're going to like this. So click on this next one for the material preview up in the right-hand corner here. Now we're seeing some color. We're seeing a little something happen. So this is actually the back of this object. So I'm going to rotate around. I'm going to click on this compass thing this time. I'm actually going to rotate around to the front, and then you can see our luxury item here that we're working with. So yeah, there it is. We have an object inside of our scene. So now let's get into basic controls for moving an object. This object really doesn't need to move, but I think that it's a good time to just start talking about the basics of moving an object. I think that it's going to help to hear it multiple times. So if this is the first time that you're hearing these shortcuts, I think it'll help kind of get it into your head how these work. So to move an object, I'm sure you've noticed if you just grab it, if you just click on it, left click, move it around, nothing happens. So there are some different ways you can do this. So over here on the left, there is this bunch of arrows. So click on this bunch of arrows. Then if you click on our object, now you see these axes arrows in different directions. If you click on the red one, it'll move on the red x-axis. And then also if you press on a Mac Command Z, you'll go back. I guess on Windows that's Control Z. And then same thing, if you grab and it'll kind of light up, like it's semi-opaque right now, but the green will kind of light up as your mouse goes over it. And you can drag that and it'll stay on the y-axis. So I'm going to press Control Z so it goes back in the middle. And then same thing for our blue z-axis. You can kind of drag that. And if it ends up somewhere weird, again, Command Z or Control Z if you're on Windows. And you might be thinking, okay, well, why can't I just kind of grab it and move it wherever? So that's one of the issues that starts to happen in three-dimensional space, that if you just grab it and lift it up, it kind of doesn't know, did you mean to push that straight back, or did you mean to lift that like just straight up? So being connected to these axes lets you know exactly what's happening and keeps you and the computer on the same page for where this thing is supposed to go. So the other way that you can do this is you can press G for grab, and that actually does allow you to do this. And you can see what I'm talking about. So you can press G for grab, and then you can press X immediately after that. For some reason, it's not going to show up on the little thing that I have, but press G and then press X, and then you're moving around on the X axis again. Now, if you want it to stay wherever you moved it, you like this spot over here, left mouse click, and now it is attached at that spot. Again, you can press Command Z if you want it to go back. Same thing, you can press G, and then right after, press Z, and you don't have to hold them. Just press and release G, then press and release Z, and then now we're moving around. If you just move your mouse up and down, we're moving around on the Z axis. And so say that you started moving around on the Z axis and you're like, oh wait, I didn't mean to move around on the Z axis. You can actually just then press X and it'll just change it. Like it doesn't stick to that. It doesn't stick to where you put it until you left mouse click. So you're moving on the X and you're like, oh wait, X was wrong. You can press Y. Oh, Y, that's what I wanted. Oh wait, maybe it's not. Then you could press Z, and you could just keep pressing X, Y, Z all day long and do different directions, and it won't stick to any of them until you left mouse click. Boom, you can press Control Z. So one more time, I'm doing G, I'm doing X, I'm moving my mouse around, it's moving left and right, we're having a great time. And then I realized that I actually don't want this to move at all. I don't want to just click it and then press escape again like I just did 100 times. You can actually press escape in the middle of it and it'll just go back to where it was. So G, Z, I don't want to move it at all, escape, boom, it's back to where it was. So in our next installment, we're going to be talking about some super fun stuff. This is really going to sell you on this. This is the real crux. You're going to just be like, oh, I just can't get enough Blender now. A lot of work goes into making these videos, and I had to walk here in a snowstorm. So if you want to smash that like button, I'm just kidding, but do it though.